I'm Emelia Fournier here with Christopher Curtis. This week, we're going to talk about the stripper strike and Carney's Liberals' push for more surveillance.
We'll also be looking into allegations of fraud at the Conservative Party of Quebec and who's been raising money for the mayor of Montreal. Welcome to the Is Rover.
You probably heard about Montreal's stripper strike on May 23rd during F1 weekend. It's been making national and international headlines. As we're filming this, it hasn't happened yet, but I plan on going to the protest. The strike was organized by the Sex Work Autonomous Committee, or SWAC. Spokespeople from SWAC say they want to abolish the bar fee, where strippers have to pay their managers money to dance. SWAC is also demanding a safe, healthy working environment in clubs and massage parlors, an end to hiring and scheduling discrimination, worker status with Quebec's Labor Board to access protections like sick leave and EI, and eventually a wage. More broadly, they're demanding the decriminalization of sex work. I wrote about the working conditions of sex workers in Montreal in my latest story for The Rover. All sex workers I spoke to support decriminalization, but they are not unanimous in their support for the rest of SWAC's demands. For some, wages mean less control over shifts, breaks, and clients. Managers could be less likely to leave strippers to their own devices and more likely to have higher standards for their performances. Formalized worker status could shut out migrant workers, those with criminal records who benefit from the independent contractor model. Some sex workers may show up to SWAC's protests even if they aren't in full support of the strike to support their fellow workers and the fight for decriminalization.
What I love about your piece is that it's clear you spent months working on this. It's clear you built trust with a lot of different sex workers, and it brings like a ton of nuance to this debate. Can you, for people who are maybe new to this or who don't think about it very often, like what are those daily working conditions like for sex workers in Montreal?
Yeah, so I have spoken to, on the record, 8 sex workers, off the record, a few more. Essentially, it's good and bad, right? Like, one of the reasons why some people flock to sex work is because maybe they're disabled, maybe they don't have status, maybe they want control over their schedule, and also it pays more than a minimum wage job. I had multiple people tell me essentially that doing sex work was a more dignified form of labor to them because at least when they were pandering to clients, they were seeing a direct benefit from that, right? So that's sort of some of the reasons why people like to do it. And also some people like being social. They like using their body in a certain way. So
there's this great scene in the story where like they're in their bras and in their heels and stuff, and they're just smoking cigarettes, kind of waiting. And it reminded me of when, when I was working construction and you're just kind of by the side of the road. You're just workers. You're workers in like a bad situation or just like a tough job. And I found that like the dignity of that makes it into the piece. And like what you're doing for this piece, which has been covered in so many different media outlets versus what you might see in the New York Times, the Gazette, wherever. Like, what do you think makes your piece different than theirs?
I think I give sex workers the space to speak because when I was writing this article, when I started writing it, it wasn't supposed to be about the strike. It was just supposed to be about sex work in general. And then we had a timely lead. It's crass to say, but that's sort of why that hits at the top. And, I put a lot of care into assuring people's anonymity because sex workers are criminalized in a certain way. It's this thing where if you sell your own sexual services, you're immune from prosecution, but everyone around sex work is criminalized. So having that sensitivity to talk about that with them in a way that made them feel comfortable, and just really taking the time, like my interviews with individual sex workers were all like an hour, sometimes more, sometimes we'd be texting before and after. In some cases, I let them see the sections that I wrote that involved their quotes so that they could see if anything was like potentially identifiable. We also did a photo shoot where I had the photographer essentially sign an NDA and where also they got to meet each other. And then we edited the photos, obviously, for to remove identifying features and understanding that you can't just like walk into a club and try to talk to some strippers because their manager might see that. And because of their current working conditions where they don't really have access to workers' rights because they're criminalized and because they work as independent contractors, they essentially, their managers can fire them for essentially whatever reason. So a lot of the sex workers I talked to were like, I get along well with the managers at my club, blah, blah, blah. But there is always this kind of like, you could get fired for kind of whatever.
Yeah.
So my fear for this weekend, I don't know how it's going to go down, but people just sort of indiscriminately filming or taking photos of people, even people who are not participating in the protest, but just walking into their jobs. Like, some of these girls are getting stalked and have had to move clubs. Some of them could get evicted if their landlord finds out that they're a stripper. Even if stripping is technically allowed, it's just like, oh, well, I might be seen as profiting off of sex work because I don't know what you do when you get in that strip club, when you get out of it. So I'm going to now evict you, and I know that you work there because I saw that you were in this story about sex work. Because
under the law, if you profit off of sex work, then you're a criminal.
If it's not your own, yeah. If it's not your own.
Can I ask you also, like, why the importance of F1 weekend? I think to most Montrealers, like, we know right away why, but, like, why?
So there's been some assaults during F1 weekend, and
people come from all over, right?
People come from all over. Some of the girls I talked to and some of the people I talked to were like, a lot of the time the out-of-towners are like, have more money and like whatever. But during F1 weekend, they said it attracts like the worst crowd, and that's just like sort of notorious among sex workers
and everyone in the service industry that I know has, like, they dread you make money on F1 weekend, but it's also a giant pain in the ass.
And then even in terms of making money, because managers charge a bar fee and they can set that bar fee to kind of whatever, obviously there's kind of a market rate, so to speak, but the later you go in the night, the higher the fee is going to be. But also if there's a special event happening like the F1 weekend, they're going to charge more money. One club charged like $110, but it basically incentivizes management to overschedule the amount of strippers that they have at the clubs, and then the strippers obviously have less clients per worker. So that was another logic there, and one of the reasons why SWAC is opposing the bar fee is because they feel it's unfair. Especially in situations like these where there's some big event happening and then a bunch of extra people get scheduled. So then it makes it so that they walk away with less money, sometimes no money, sometimes in the negatives, which I've been told is happening more and more.
So people tend to flatten sex work, like sex workers are all victims, or like they make these big generalized statements about sex work. What I love about your article is you address so many different aspects of the work and also a variety of opinions on how the work should be improved and should be done. There have been sex workers who fought for wages, and this could be a good or a bad thing. Could you maybe explore that a bit?
Yeah. So unfortunately, after the piece, or the day before the piece was getting published, I became aware of this network called Pleasers on the Ground, and it's a network, not like an opposing advocacy group to SWAC. Some of them are also SWAC members, but just sort of a loose network of strippers who are like not down for waged work or the elimination of the bar fees. Some of them might be, or the formal worker status, because basically they feel like it could make them lose their autonomy. One of the reasons why, like, there's a lot of people with ADHD with like unpredictable health conditions and stuff like that who like the fact that they don't have a wage because it means they can show up kind of when they want. And one of the strippers I talked to said that the bar fee actually sort of gives them a point of leverage almost. Like, I'm sure there's a diversity of perspectives there, but they're sort of like, well, this bar fee is supposed to go towards improving, it's supposed to go towards like cleanup and like making sure our dressing rooms are like in good shape and improving the infrastructure.
So if you've paid the bar fee, you can say, look, I paid this. You have to hold up your end of the bargain.
Yeah. And basically one of the strippers in the Pleasers on the Ground network told me that there was a case where at a club, a bunch of the strippers banded together, essentially forming a temporary autonomous union. They banded together and told management, look, it's gross in here. If you don't start cleaning, like, you need to take care of the hygiene in this club, and we're not going to pay our bar fee for a month until you deal with this. And it worked. So, it's sort of like and their argument also with the wages versus bar fees is that like, if you're doing wages, then you certainly won't be getting the full cost of dances or tips. It'll be like kind of a wages plus commissions model is what it sounds like to me. And they're like, I'd rather just pay a fixed amount, even if it's obviously a little bit variable, but not in the same way as a percentage. And then my manager doesn't care if I like go take a break for 2 hours, or if I am having... Because
you've already given them their money.
Yeah, or like if I show up and really half-ass it on the pole tonight, they're like, well, whatever, that's on you. You're the one not making tips, not me.
Yeah.
So they're kind of worried that if there's like a wage plus commission thing, then suddenly management will have a vested interest in how much tips, more so than just like, oh, they're bringing clients in. Like, they're like, no, if you don't do XYZ. So they're worried that it could affect their autonomy. And that's sort of the concern with the wage model. And like, strippers used to get paid wages and used to have access to some worker benefits back in like pre-1990s. I think it was in the 1990s where they stopped doing that. I couldn't find an exact
It's not
date.
super well documented.
It's not well documented.
Yeah.
But like, the thing is that like I just explained, it's tricky to see how it would go down. And I spoke to a stripper who's worked in Montreal and in San Francisco, where they've had wages since I think 2019. And the perk of having the wages and worker status was that when the pandemic hit, they got workers, they got EI, essentially.
You get compensated for,
They got
these protections.
Yeah, they got some protections. But now she told me that like, strippers are making way less money. More of them are turning to full service sex work because the hourly rate has ended up being lower, and like, there's a lot more marginalized people doing sex work. So yeah, that's kind of like, it sounds good to some people in theory, but then in practice, formalizing the work and getting a wage seems there's a lot of dissent among sex workers. However, that's not to say that they're not down with like potentially forming autonomous unions where each club kind of like has a sort of less formal union, or like advocating for, some of them might be pro eliminating the bar fee, I'm not too sure, or like just improving hygiene and security, because like, security in clubs right now, it's very variable if security is going to actually look out for the girls and the dancers, or if
they're kind of looking out for the clients.
They're more looking out for the club.
Yeah.
Than they want to protect the club. And part of that logic is because the work is criminalized, right? Yeah. And they don't want the club to get in trouble.
Yeah.
And the same thing kind of goes for the way that police deal with strippers and sex workers. They're very dismissive. They're very patronizing. They will even say stuff like if in the rare occasion where a sex worker would try to report an assault, which I have a story in my article about that, like, literally the cops have told him, well, you were asking for it, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the fact that it's criminalized and all the legislation is in this language of victimization and trafficking and blah, 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 you're either a victim or a criminal, it makes it so it's really hard for them to access their workers' rights. So that's kind of why sex workers, every single sex worker I spoke to was like, no, we want decriminalization. Even though not all sex workers might be on board with wages and worker status, I think that their cause now is getting a lot of media attention, which they don't often get. And you see the way that the public perceives sex workers in like the comment sections of some of these mainstream media articles. It's pretty rough in there. They're very dehumanizing. Yeah. But what was also cool was under the video I posted was I got sex workers, strippers commenting.
Yeah, I saw there was like a discussion between you and a group, and it's like, oh, we'll meet on Tuesday.
Yeah, they're discussing amongst each other about kind of the pros and cons. So bringing that sort of dialogue into mainstream, even if the strike doesn't go perfectly or whatever, or there's some infighting that needs to be worked out or some disagreements that need to be worked out, the sex workers have been sort of under, in the shadows for a very long time. And seeing media kind of show up and write about sex workers going on strike as actual workers is an interesting development.
It's like a quantum leap. Like,
yeah,
it really
yeah,
is.
yeah.
When I see the New York Times or The Athletic, which is owned by the New York Times, reporting on this and calling it a strike and referring to labor rights, it's not perfect. It's not a great piece of journalism, but I think that that's part of what you're doing. That's part of what we're trying to do with the Rover. And it's my favorite thing that we've run in a very long time. It's one of the many, many, many reasons I love when you write with us. And, you know, if you haven't already, you should check it out on the website.
Thank you.
therover.ca. What do a lobbyist for big tobacco, an operative pushing Israeli propaganda, and a former candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada have in common? They all raised money for Mayor Soraya Martinez-Ferrada's party, Ensemble Montréal. Ensemble recently published its annual report on the City of Montreal's website. In it are the names of 191 people authorized to raise money on behalf of the party. Mostly, these are candidates and their staff. But if you look closer, you see who the mayor's power brokers are. The people, in other words, who can be counted on to bring their network of donors and political connections to the table. People like Joshua Wolf, regional director at CJPAC, the Canadian Jewish Political Affairs Committee. Here he is on a podcast just ahead of the election.
And obviously, if you go downtown on the wrong day, it still does come to be true that you could find yourself in the middle of a very anti-Semitic, pro-Hamas demonstration.
To conflate opposition to the genocide with support for Hamas and hatred of the Jewish people, this is straight out of the Israeli propaganda playbook. And this guy, Joshua Wolf, has a direct line to the mayor's office, which is normal when you raise money for the mayor's party. Also included on the list are people like Agop Everlekian, who was chief of staff to former Mayor Gerald Tremblay. For those of you who are too young to remember Tremblay, he resigned in 2012 amid allegations that he looked the other way while his party fundraised illegally. His right-hand man, Michael Applebaum, served a prison sentence for accepting bribes from real estate developers while in office. Everlekian, for the record, also ran for the Conservatives during the 2011 federal election. The deeper you look into Ensemble's power brokers, the more you see a pattern emerge. Lobbyists with ties to real estate developers and the city's business elite. The wealthiest people in Montreal have a seat at the table, which isn't immoral or illegal, but do the most vulnerable people also have a voice inside Ensemble Montréal? Let's get into it.
So you've covered a lot of mayoral administrations. How have the people of influence changed comparing the current administration to previous ones?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So some very major things happened in between. Okay, the first thing we need to know is that the party of Soraya Martinez-Ferrada, well, she inherited that from Denis Coderre. That used to be his political party. And Denis Coderre inherited that from Gerald Tremblay. It was Gerald Tremblay's political party called Union Montreal. This was the party of corruption. The Charbonneau Commission into corruption in political fundraising, it started largely because of reporting on Union Montreal. So that, you had the chief fundraiser for Union Montreal was this guy, Bernard Trepanier. His nickname was Mr. 3% because, according to allegations by anti-corruption officers, he would demand 3% of the value of the engineering contracts he would give out, right? The city would give out. And so his role was extremely important. He would get these construction companies to the table. They would finance the party to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. It got so out of hand that the Charbonneau Commission changed the way political fundraising is done in Quebec. You used to be able to raise like $1,500, $2,000 per person, per donor during an election year. Now it's $100 to $200. That's how bad it got. So I think it's important to realize that none of this involved this current administration, but they inherited a system that rotated around corruption.
So you've mentioned this to me in the past, that the shift has been, instead of having big names in construction and that kind of corruption, it's shifted more to having people of influence who are more in real estate or have an ideological agenda. If you could expand on that, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, Union Montréal was the construction party, right? All the paving companies basically ran that party, right? They would come up to, they had what they called turnkey elections, where they'd say, look, we're going to give you all the money, you just give us the contracts. That fell apart after all the Charbonneau Commission, which isn't to say that our politics and our construction industries are squeaky clean, but it is not as bad as it was. So now what's happening is more that because of all of the tomfoolery during the corruption years, the donations are really low. So if anything, they depend more on fundraisers to go and get. You can't just get 10 or 15 people now. You got to get like 100 people to donate. Like this party raised $700,000 for the last election, which is huge for a municipal election in Montreal. And they did that by tapping into people who know people. And those people are the business elite of this city. You have someone like the ideological side. You have someone like Joshua Wolf, who, is a frequent Liberal Party of Canada donor. He used to be a staffer for the Liberal Party of Quebec. So you have that political side covered. But then you've also got like the money people and the people who are constantly in contact with the business community. So you have Hugo Delorme. He is a lobbyist for Imperial Tobacco. He represents a medical placement agency that's like a numbered corporation. They have over 500 employees, mostly nurses, that they place across the province, which jacks the price of healthcare. He works with the pharmaceutical industry, with biotech, and with developers. Serge Paquette, another fundraiser for the party. He's part of something called Le Groupe Maurice. They build private elder care homes. These are people representing the moneyed interests in Montreal. These are people who, they just want to build, they want to deregulate, they want to get something out of this administration. It's not corrupt. It's just that they have a huge influence inside the party. And do ordinary people have a huge interest or a voice inside the party? And I think the answer is pretty clear. They don't.
Yeah, I don't think that none of those people are tenants, right? A lot of them are landlords. They profit off of the housing market being deregulated, off of skyrocketing rents. And then there's also the pro-Israel lobby that is shoehorned in there, despite the fact that, most Canadians are not supportive of.
Yeah. I mean, there was a poll by Leger in April 10th. And it found that only 17% of Quebecers have a favorable view of Israel. A majority of Canadians believe Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, and only like 22% of Canadians have a favorable view of Israel. And yet, this administration bends over backwards not to criticize Israel. You saw just the other day, Ehab Latoyef is one of 3 Quebecers who are being held in Israel right now. Maybe by the time this airs, they'll be released, but they're being held in Israel, and people confronted the mayor about it at City Hall. There's footage of it on Instagram, and she was very, very careful to kind of say like, well, maybe we'll call the government and make sure it's okay, but I don't want Israel to think we're criticizing.
Yeah, and one of them's even works for McGill. Like.
Yeah. No. It's a very like. Maybe it won't cost them anything right now, but there is a huge gap in between what their core beliefs are on this issue and what the core beliefs of most Quebecers, Canadians, and Montrealers are. And when you're that at odds on an issue that speaks to like your basic humanity, your basic view of like what a genocide is, who's suffering, who is the victim here, it doesn't bode well for them medium to long term. I mean, for now, it's not, I don't think it's on the forefront of everyone's mind, but it's the kind of thing that erodes people's confidence in you. So when you surround yourself with those people, you're just going to open yourself up to criticism that you're not doing enough for ordinary people. So another example is the 2020 bylaw. Back when Projet Montréal was in power, they had this bylaw that forced developers to include a certain number of social housing units and affordable housing in their projects, or they had to pay a fine. And they always chose to pay the fine, so it was kind of an ineffective law. Although it built up millions of dollars for the city in fines that they can spend on social housing, it's not the same as building social housing. And so the mayor has gotten rid of that, which was like number 1 on the developers' demand list going into this election. So they already got what they wanted largely. And in fact, the city is going to be cooperating with 3 of the biggest developers in the city on a project to build social housing and affordable housing. It's something like 2,500 units. I think it would cost the government between $15 and $20 million a year to run. We'll see how it goes, but it's very rare that these public-private partnerships end up saving money, and it's very rare that they end up doing what they what they were intended to do. If anything, the taxpayers are guaranteeing the profits to these companies, and we're not exactly sure what the services will be in return. Because one of these guys on the list, Serge Paquette, his company was sued by hundreds of their tenants for not living up to their end of the bargain. They ended up having to give their tenants in these old age homes like massive discounts because they weren't getting the services. So there's no silver bullet here. They're obviously, like, I don't doubt that they're trying to do good, but they're also, their goal is to make money.
Right.
And that's sometimes can be at odds with like people living a decent life.
Yeah.
We'll see how it turns out.
We'll see. That's how politics in Montreal is one giant. We'll see.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you don't like it's astounding to me, like how it's hard to describe how openly corrupt politics in Montreal were just like half of a generation ago. Like, that's why like this guy Egop Everleckian, like, sure, donate to the party, show up at a cocktail fundraiser. You're a voter. You get to represent who you want to represent. But do you want to associate yourself with the chief of staff of a mayor who resigned in disgrace, whose right-hand man ended up in prison? Many other people in his entourage, like Mr. 3%, Bernard Trepanier, the fundraiser. The only reason he's not in prison is because the charges against him were stayed because he had terminal cancer. But like, I remember going to those hearings, and the evidence was very strong, like wiretap recordings, handshake deals, all that kind of stuff. So like, that's not like, no one's saying this guy Egop did anything wrong, but like, there is a perception issue of like, why are these guys still around? These guys were in politics at a time where they were super toxic.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a reminder that like, candidates who present themselves as a kind of change candidate, it's very hard to claim that and then keep all these old hats around and be surrounded by these lobbyists and this money. Like, again, no one is saying anyone did anything illegal, and I'm saying this in part because they haven't gotten back to me with any of my questions yet. I haven't heard their side of the story, but it doesn't look great either.
Yeah, I mean, even though they put a cap on donations, right, it doesn't change the fact that if the cap is $150, a lot of the people I know can't pay that.
No.
And then you're whipping, a bunch of donors from elite class. So you're essentially crowdsourcing the money instead of one company giving you a huge chunk. You're still getting it from just a bunch of individual people. It's more work. Yeah. But it seems to me that the legislation makes it so it's a bit more of a laborious process, but the outcome is a little bit, it's similar, not the same.
At the end of the day, you depend on these people.
Yeah.
Because like, this is not the United States. We don't have these insane expenses but you have to rent, you've got to buy food for your volunteers. You've got to pay some of your people. You have to rent campaign space. Like, this shit costs money. And they doubled, the fundraising hall of Projet Montréal, which I think is like a twofold thing. One, people weren't super enthusiastic about Projet. Yeah. But two, they have a good, strong network that they've built up. And obviously, when these guys raise money for you, you're going to kind of owe them something. Even if you don't literally owe them something, they have access to you. They have a direct access to you that normal, ordinary, struggling citizens don't. So you always have to ask yourself, like, well, who has a voice in the administration? And like, the voice in the administration is the real estate industry, people who want deregulation, old political hands, liberal stalwarts, and ideologues whose beliefs are totally at odds with the majority of Canadians.
The Carney government is trying to push through Bill C-22, which would require electronic service providers like phone companies, messaging apps like Signal and Telegram, and internet companies to store users' metadata for up to a year so that cops and CSIS can use it to, quote, combat threats and criminal activity. This is obviously for surveillance purposes. For those of you who don't know, metadata is information about your data, like the location you sent a text from, the type of camera you use to capture a video, that kind of thing. It can basically reveal where you go, who you communicate with, and what you do. The threshold for getting this info is low. As Marie-Hélène Gay notes in her column for The Rover, quote, it is based on a relatively low legal threshold, reasonable grounds to suspect, Technically, any jealous police officer or minister curious about the past of a person they are seeking to imprison or whose rights they are seeking to restrict could employ this. This bill will also allow law enforcement to use this information in court. Signal, an encrypted messaging app, said it would rather shut down Canadian operations than, quote, be compelled to compromise on the privacy promises we have made to our users. A lot of journalists like myself use this app to talk to vulnerable people. The Internet Society, a coalition of civil society organizations, companies, and cybersecurity experts, wrote an open letter to the government saying, quote, there is no way to provide backdoor access to encrypted data and communications without compromising the privacy and security of millions of law-abiding citizens. Conservative and NDP MPs and Green Party leader Elizabeth May voiced their opposition to C-22 during the second reading of the bill in April. Apple, Meta, and representatives from the US government worried that it could compromise cybersecurity. You know it's bad if tech giants and the US are telling you that it's not worth the trade-off for more surveillance. Bill C-22 could also compel international companies to break the law of its home country. Switzerland-based Proton VPN said they could not hand over data without following Swiss legal processes. The bill has passed its second reading, but is currently under review by the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. The Liberals say there's a lot of misunderstanding surrounding the bill, but that they're open to amending it.
One of the things people will often say with this is like, well, if you have nothing to hide, why would you mind someone looking? But a lot of people, millions, in fact, use apps like Signal and Proton. Why?
So Signal's a really interesting app because it's like open source and it has end-to-end encryption. Most like encrypted messaging services will have like an encryption decoding key. So if the company wanted to, it could in fact unencrypt your messages. Signal doesn't do that. They on their end can't unencrypt your messages. So it makes it so that it's a more secure service for people to use. Obviously, it's not perfect, as in like people can, you know, send screenshots of your message, someone installs malware on your phone, that kind of thing, people could still access. And with Proton, it's based in Switzerland. So a lot of people are moving away from Gmail because the US government is increasingly, you know, Google has been using mining stuff to train AI. There's worries that the US government can access it. It's based in the US. There's those kinds of concerns. And Proton's based in Switzerland, like we said, that has a pretty high threshold for violating people's privacy in their legislation. And the whole argument of like, oh, you have nothing to hide, like you'd be surprised. And it's not just about like, oh, I'll tell someone whatever, but as you know, people become increasingly criminalized, like we see what's been happening at protests where protesters are getting arrested, where on university campuses, like, you know, at McGill, they're asking you to present your ID everywhere you go. In the US, we've seen people getting deported when they had valid visas because they were at a Palestine protest. So that's just
what the
because
data allows. They
you
know
can,
where you were.
They
and
know
when
where
you
you are. Like it can show where you are at all times because most of us are carrying our phones everywhere we go. So it's like if you are, you know, working with vulnerable people, if you're participating in community activism, whether you think it's like, whether you agree with, you know, what people in certain community groups are doing or not, at the same time, it's like, and whether or not you think you're safe, you're like, no, I'm abiding the law. The law can change. And the government can decide to surveil people when it wants to. And by allowing them this sort of backdoor access through a year's worth of metadata that these companies are now expected to store, combined with the low threshold of like, where you just have to like suspect, you don't have to believe that there's wrongdoing. It makes it so that, like anyone can, like the law enforcement and the government, they can just sort of access anyone. And there's like a really long history of the government, the Canadian government.
Even without this bill.
There's a long history of the Canadian government spying on Indigenous activists, right? Indigenous land defenders, even Indigenous people who are not involved in those movements, but just happen to live in communities where there's activism happening. So like, if you're sitting there thinking, well, I'm not breaking the law, what do I have to hide? You don't know when, say, the government's going to decide to build a pipeline through your land. And if you show up to a protest and there's like an injunction, or you're coordinating with people who are protesting something, You don't know. You don't know what's going to be criminalized
One
down the
person
line.
smashes a window or steals something, and then everyone connected to that person becomes guilty by association. Before any of this happened, I mean, about 10 years ago, there was a scandal where the Montreal police were spying on journalists to find out what the source of a leak was. So while they say, well, no, we were only wanted to find wrongdoing on our end, you're still spying on journalists.
Yeah, and just because someone's in law enforcement doesn't mean that they're a good person. Like,
wait, are you saying no?
So in Marie-Hélène's article, in her column, I should say, about this, you know, a police officer who's feeling vindictive of like an ex, for example, he can suspect her of something and then dig into, like, find out her location, where she's been going, who she's been seeing. Like, it's very worrying that law enforcement and CSIS could just like basically access this with a really, really, like I said, low threshold to just see everyone's data.
It's like a cocktail of like incredibly powerful technology and people who are flawed. You know, we're great and we're terrible. And like all of that with access to this kind of power is rarely a good combination.
And that's not to say that, like, obviously legislation is needed to sort of explore how law enforcement and the government should be able to access these things, because it obviously makes sense in certain scenarios. Like right now, if I think they can't even use stuff that they're able to publicly find themselves on the internet as evidence in court. Like, there are things that make a lot of sense. It makes sense to sort of try to encode, to try to contain what they can and cannot access, but this is seeming to sort of give them open access and also force companies like Signal that don't store this kind of data on purpose to protect people's privacy. It would force them to now not only like just have an encryption key so they can access it, but store it for a really long time and then provide it if compelled to do so, which completely goes against the whole point of this app, right? Like, so they're like, well, no, obviously we'll stop operating in Canada if you're going to make us do this, because we're not writing this into our code. Like,
yeah, and there's zero guarantee that any of this survives the Supreme Court challenge. So there, you know, there's plausibly a scenario where the cops use this for X number of years as it's making its way through the courts, and then all of the convictions and arrests they've made using this bill would then be invalidated, and we'd have wasted a tremendous amount of time.
And not even convictions and arrests. We're also talking about like mapping out networks, picking people to watch, right? Because once they sort of see who you're connected to, it makes it like, once they pick people that they think are at risk or whatever, it makes it so that it's not even just who they're bringing to court, it's who they're keeping tabs on.
Yeah. So. And then you throw AI into it, right? And it takes away, like, you don't have to have a person going through everything. You have a machine making deductions and associations based on, well, whatever is being fed by
we don't
cops.
know what kind of software they're using. We don't know. And this is why, again, it was so crazy when I saw that, like, the U.S. government was like, please don't do this.
The police state is like, guys, this is a police state.
Because they're right, though, that it opens storing that kind of data, having companies store that kind of data, and then hand it over to law enforcement and CSIS. And let's be honest, police forces aren't always super up to date on their, like, what kind of software they're using. Yeah. It makes it, when you open up access to data like that, you can't super control who has access to it necessarily if you have people who are sophisticated hackers, right? So it's a huge cybersecurity threat too. It's crazy.
Well, thanks for terrifying us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and quickly to kind of talk about, as journalists, it's important for us to have access to these kinds of apps, right? Like, I know I used it when I was writing the sex worker story, because it was like, obviously I'm talking to vulnerable people. We don't want these messages ending up in some kind of like investigation or whatever.
Yeah. If they go over the border and they have to give their phone up to someone,
if they cross the border, that's a big factor. Like, it makes it a lot easier to communicate with vulnerable sources who want to stay anonymous. So
I'm like I'm illiterate on the tech side, but I sometimes manage to use it and appreciate that it makes me safer with my sources.
Yeah, it definitely makes people feel a lot more comfortable. And like, honestly, we don't, if this sort of happens, it makes it so that we're only going to really be able to coordinate with vulnerable sources in person. That's what that means.
Yeah.
And leave our phones at home, I guess.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, that's where we're at now.
Not terrifying at all.
No.
Moving on to provincial politics. The Parti Québécois is accusing Quebec's Conservative Party of fraud. The PQ claims that during a by-election the Conservatives lost last year, they spent way beyond what they're legally allowed to and then lied about it. In total, the PQ estimates that their rivals spent upwards of $237,000 during the campaign. That's twice the legal limit. They say the Conservative Party's financial reports show a series of unusually cheap expenses. Their candidate, party leader Éric Duhaime, handed out copies of his autobiography to voters for free. That's legal. What might not be is that his campaign paid just $1.70 per book. He bought 4,000 copies. Without his massive discount, that would have cost his party over $90,000. That's most of the campaign's budget. And this was not the only suspicious discount the PQ uncovered. Under Quebec's electoral code, it is illegal for a political party to pay less than the actual value of something. That discount, one that saved the Conservatives tens of thousands of dollars, well, it's technically a political contribution, and those have to be reported accurately. Duhaime ended up being blown out in the election, losing by over 4,000 votes to the PQ's Alex Boissonneau. If that weren't bad enough, an investigation by Election Quebec into the Conservatives could lead to their leader being kicked out of provincial politics for 5 years. Here is Duhaime's response to the allegations.
Le Parti conservateur du Québec avait demandé un avis au DGEQ et on l'a fait suivant les normes du directeur général des élections. Et si le Parti québécois là, cherche des criminels puis cherche des passés criminels dans Arthabasca, c'est pas dans notre campagne qu'il faut qu'ils regardent, c'est leur candidat dans Arthabasca.
Éric Duhaime's being investigated. What are the exact allegations?
So, like, the discount on the books is that, well, first of all, that's a pretty great way to become a bestseller, right? Just buy 4,000 copies of your own book.
Give them out for free.
Give them out for free. That's a huge discount. You're talking like a 90% discount. And it, of course, gives them a super unfair advantage, right? If you're spending just $4,000 or $5,000 on something that should cost $90,000, then yeah, that gives you a huge advantage over the other party if they're playing by the rules, which we assume they are. There's no complaints against them. So that was one thing. The other was they rented, as headquarters, they rented a cottage that's like worth almost $1 million. They rented it for $2,000 for a month. That same cottage on a vacation rental site goes for $3,000 a week.
Oh
so
God.
Again, you're looking at like a savings of over $10,000. Like these add up. Like what strikes me here is that I think beyond the whole, like, are they being ethical? Is this corrupt? Whatever. It just, the Conservatives don't seem very serious. Like these are very basic mistakes. And it was quite easy for the PQ to find it, highlight it, send it to Elections Quebec. And it's not unrealistic that after an investigation, Duhaime's out of politics for 5 years. And without Duhaime, that party, and I think that might be your follow-up question, they don't have great chances. He is that party as far as they're concerned. Like, nobody really knew who they were before he came along. For the record, Éric Duhaime was a very popular radio host in Quebec City, very controversial, very conservative, made a series of inappropriate jokes and comments about Islam before the Quebec City shooting. Like, he has not contributed great things to our public discourse. When he took the party over, it became very anti-vax. It shows, I think, that this party that garnered 15% of the popular vote in the last election is quite chaotic and vulnerable to like very basic mistakes. And while people might ideologically align with them, they might look at this and say, is it worth my vote? Like, if I vote for these guys, will it even count? Are they on the level? That's just one problem.
Yeah, well, it seems, to me, it seems pretty obvious. Like, it's a pretty flagrant, contravention of the rules, but then also it's also very easy to track that.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like they did something that was like, this took a big
It wasn't
investigation.
sophisticated. It was not sophisticated.
So I'm just kind of wondering, what did they think was going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, like, again, it shows you the danger of placing someone to the forefront because they're charismatic and just because, like, radio show hosts don't always make great politicians. Ask Bernard Drinville. I'm sorry. It's one thing to laugh at your own jokes.
Yeah.
But no, they don't. And I think what I'm taking away from this is the following. If if this is true, and they did double their budget, and they went all out, the guy hands out 4,000 copies of his autobiography to voters. They just give everything they can to this one riding, and they lose by 11%, 4,000 votes. Is he even electable? Like, are we just running, like, will he be a giant distraction? The second question, or like the second kind of epiphany that I've had, is that if this is the beginning of the end for this party in this particular election cycle, where does that 15% go? We have a really tight race of like the Liberals and PQ in most polls. They're neck and neck at around 30%. If this 15% were to collapse, it would probably go more towards the PQ than the Liberals, and it might even push them into majority territory. And so the next question becomes, well, why would these voters go to the PQ? Because they've been taking increasingly conservative positions. One of the, like, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon recently came out in the statement where he called Radio-Canada journalists Marxists. He came out and in that statement was defending a position he had taken, saying like it's important for women to have babies if they want to have babies. But I think it was like there's a fixation on the side of the PQ and the CAQ and a lot of conservatives in Quebec over immigration versus our population growing because Quebecers are making more babies. They're all competing for that kind of weird nativist vote. Yeah. And I think this could balance in their favor. And all of which is to say, this argument about having babies, an anti-abortion group took hold of it, and they were like, we really agree with what the PQ is saying. So the PQ is going from a party that was like basically derided as unionists and Marxists in the 1960s and 70s. They're going from that party to a party that is calling people Marxists and being endorsed by anti-abortion groups. Yeah. So this would explain a pretty major shift in our politics. I don't know if it's going to work, but it is, I think, a signal for how dirty and maybe ugly this election will be, because the last one was really bad. The one before that was really bad. And the one before that was also really bad. I don't think this bodes well for our sanity in October.
Yeah, it seems like the only, like, without Eric Duhaime at the helm, if he's gone for 5 years, there's sort of a vacuum, right? And some people will still vote for the party no matter what, but it will potentially,
they became a serious political threat for two reasons. One, Eric Duhaime, huge following in Quebec City. Two, during the pandemic, they were super anti-vax or pro-choice or whatever you want to call it, but they were very much against all of these measures. Eric Duhaime was part of the trucker convoy or wanted to join the trucker convoy. Like, they latched onto that movement and raised a ton of money off of it. But now that those measures are no longer really a part of our daily lives, they've sort of lost their raison d'être. And, we'll see what it is moving forward, if they even move. Like, if they move forward without him, it's going to be a disaster for them, I think. Welcome to the Week Is Rover. I'm having a stroke.
Okay, wait, what are we doing? What do I say? Kill me. Sorry. Yeah. That sucks.
That's okay.
Hi, Justin. It went too far. I went too fast.
Bottom of your car, you're like, oh yeah, this could end. It's fucking confusing me, the prompter.
Those with criminal status with a criminal record, not status. Frick.
How fucking dare you? Your leaf blower is too loud, sir.
I don't know what my face is doing. I'm Emelia Fournier, here with Christopher Curtis.
Moving on to
Okay, sorry, 1 second. I need to okay. Let's go. Is it good?
Holy shit.
That's the end of it.
Perfect. I will turn off this thing.